I'm Satana Deberry, the Durham County District Attorney, and welcome to In Session. In Session is a space where we just get to dig a little bit deeper into issues of safety, justice, and equity in our community. October is Domestic Violence Month, and this episode I am joined by Michele Archer, who is Director of the Family Justice Center here in Durham. It is an organization that supports the victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so we're really happy to have Michele with us here today. Michele, welcome.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I'm actually also with Durham Crisis Response Center. And so
well, that's actually my first question for you.
Okay.
Is that our viewers may be familiar with the Durham Crisis Response Center and less so with the Family Justice Center. So can you tell us exactly what the Family Justice Center is and what you do?
Sure. So the Family Justice Center is actually one of the many programs of Durham Crisis Response Center. We are a comprehensive domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking organization. We provide a lot of services to the Durham community. We have shelter, we have a Spanish language helpline, an English language helpline. We have an immigrant services program, and we also have the Family Justice Center program. Our specific focus and my team's focus is really providing legal advocacy to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We help people through the court process. We advocate for them information, help them with referrals. We work closely with a lot of the assistant district attorneys actually in your office as well, supporting a lot of the witnesses or victims in those cases that you are trying.
And we're going to put that DCRC helpline up on the screen for folks to call in, but is that the main number that they can call?
Sure. So we've got two numbers. The first one is 919-403-6562. And we have one in Spanish, and that is 919-519-3735. And people should know that these lines run 24/7. So there's always somebody at the other end to answer a call, no matter what time of the day it is and what day of the week it is. We're open through that helpline, and holidays, evenings, early mornings, we're always here.
And that's a confidential service, right? So people don't have to worry that somebody will say they called.
Yeah, all of our services are confidential. So people can call, get information. There's no commitment. There's no reporting that they contacted us. Everything is kept confidential.
People may be, you mentioned that you work very closely with us here in the office, and you're one of our great partners. We appreciate your partnership. But folks don't have to have a criminal case to call you, do they?
No, they don't. Sometimes people just need to reach out to talk to somebody. They've been experiencing domestic violence, or something feels very off in their relationship, and they just maybe want to know what the options are. They want to just talk to somebody about what's going on. And that's really the benefit of reaching out, is we can provide that support. We don't require survivors to do anything. We meet them where they're at. We listen, we support, and we also believe our survivors. And for many of them, hearing that is such a huge thing.
Well, let's drill down on that a little bit, because domestic violence is not just physical abuse. That's often how we hear about it.
Right.
And certainly here at the DA's office, we know that domestic violence can be a lot of complex situations. Can you talk a little bit about what domestic violence can look like for people?
Sure. So really, when we're talking about domestic violence, what we are describing are tactics that are used by one person in a relationship to maintain power and control over another. So I think most people, when we think about domestic violence, to your point, we understand the physical violence, we understand the bruises, and we have a reaction to that. But what we don't really understand is that really what we see more frequently in these cases is a lot of coercion, power and control, making decisions for the other person, isolating the other person, humiliating the other person, financial control, emotional control, situational control, isolation. So there are many different tactics that are being used. And I think that's why sometimes we don't recognize it, maybe, even though it might be right in front of us.
And domestic violence is not just the typical intimate partner violence that we think about either, is it?
No, it can also be comprised of family violence as well. And oftentimes, what you will see is that the abusing party or the harming party will target, children, other family members, and other people in that survivor's life as part of their tactic and power and control dynamics.
And it's not always obvious when your relationship has moved into that territory, is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a lot of times that I will hear questions from people. How did they get into that relationship and why don't they just leave? And the reality is, abusers are not advertising these behaviors. They're very charming. So it takes a while for that survivor to sometimes realize what's going on. I mean, I think if it was that apparent from the beginning, a lot of people wouldn't end up in these situations because they would see what that person's about. But they often start out as very charming, very romantic, anticipating every need that survivor may have. And then over time, a lot of those dynamics start to play out.
Sure. And we certainly can't underplay that it's often somebody we care about.
Exactly. And that's a huge piece of it too. And I also think that there's a lot of normalizing some of these behaviors that we have in popular culture, in the media. So ways that we would describe romance sometimes aren't as romantic. They're actually those power and control dynamics. So it can get very complicated sometimes for some of our survivors.
Well, domestic violence is very important here to us in the DA's office, not only just because we want people to be safe, but we know that it is sometimes a precursor to other violence. And when I took office, I created a special victims unit, and those ADAs are specially trained to work in these most complex situations. And they work especially with you all at the Family Justice Center and DCRC. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the benefits of having prosecutors who have been specially trained like that is that they really understand the dynamics of abuse. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in our work with your office is really, what does that survivor want? What do they need to not necessarily be made whole, but really to be safe? And that is an important focus. I think they are trained to understand a lot of the nuances of the tactics of the abuse. And sometimes prosecution can take a very creative turn in many ways, but really trying to, as much as possible, put the victim's needs first. And we are there to support our survivors through that process. So we do have staff that are in the courtroom during some of those cases. We will meet with that survivor, our survivor, and your staff in joint meetings. Sometimes we are relaying information on behalf of our survivors with their permission because they may feel more comfortable sharing with us, and then we pass it along. So we do have a close relationship with your office, and that you all refer sometimes survivors to us that may not have walked through our door yet, but definitely need our services.
And court can be very confusing.
Yes.
And for us, we really depend on you all to help people understand what is happening in court. Most people will only ever come to court for something like a traffic ticket.
Yeah.
So something in which they've been a victim, they're already dealing with their own trauma.
Right.
And then they're in an environment that is unfamiliar to them, and processes and language that may also be unfamiliar to them.
Yeah. And it can also be a really scary process for them. And so, as much support as we can give them and as much education around what is happening and insight into that process and being there to answer any questions that they may have, I think it really does help them through that whole experience. And we also are working from a trauma focused lens. So we really are understanding that impact on our survivors and helping them understand some of what they may be experiencing as a result of the process and some of the domestic violence that they may have experienced.
Yeah, and I really want to thank you for your advocacy, because what that has done for us in our office is it has also encouraged us to look at this through a trauma focused lens.
Yeah.
That sometimes maybe survivors just want the police to intervene in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
They may not want something to come to court.
Right.
And as prosecutors, that's not generally how we are taught to work.
Right.
Um, so we have come to understand through you all that trauma shows up in many ways. And one of the ways that trauma may show up is they want uh, the violence to stop right then, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to have to come here and talk about it again.
Right.
And we have really been working with you all to understand that,
Mm-hmm.
to advocate for survivors in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
um, and to see it as really kind of a continuum, and
Yeah.
where we fit in that continuum.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. I think the court process and law enforcement, it's just one piece of it. And there are many of our survivors who, may have never even had interactions with law enforcement and don't want to go through any court process, but still need that support. And we are able to provide that. We don't require anybody to have called the police or, have a desire to go to court. We're here for them regardless. And they know what's best. They really do know their needs. And they've been managing a lot of risk, when they come into our offices. We always say that our survivors are resilient, and it is true. They really have been managing risk, and they may do it in ways that don't look like the way that we would do it for ourselves. So we really have to understand and sit with them, and also really use that trauma informed lens to help us understand some of the behaviors we may be seeing in context.
Yes, we always try to let survivors lead in these processes.
Yes. Yep.
And let's follow up a little bit about what it means to let a survivor lead, and let a survivor have them tell us what they think is best. We know it sometimes takes 7 attempts for
Mm-hmm.
somebody to leave,
Yep.
where many of us would say, why would you stay there all that time? We know that it is a process. And so, can you talk a little bit about that resilience and why it might take that long?
Yeah. I mean, I think you touched on something, which was wanting that violence to stop in that moment. For some of our survivors, they may not want to leave. They just may want the violence to stop. And they oftentimes do care about this other person, this other party. They're in relationship with them. The other thing we have to be mindful of is that when we tell somebody just to leave, that's actually a very high risk time for our survivors. And we want to make sure that we're having a conversation with them where we are doing safety assessment and risk management planning in partnership with them, and letting them lead the discussion and tell us what has worked in the past and what won't work. If we just direct them and tell them what to do, it really is not the best way moving forward. And we're also replicating some of that power and control that they're already experiencing.
Right. And that is really important for us to remember. And this year, our agencies have tried to just be more holistically involved together in people's lives. We've
Mm-hmm.
opened the clothes closet here in our
Yes.
office for people who do choose to come to court, who may not have appropriate clothing, and our agencies now have a partnership with the Pennies for Change thrift store,
Yep.
where people can go and get business clothing, professional clothing, suits, more high-level business casual stuff that they can wear for job interviews or whatever they need, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great resource. And I'm glad that you are connected with Pennies for Change, which is the Durham Crisis Response Center thrift store, and provides a lot of resources for survivors in Durham coming to the courthouse, coming to your office, and even our clients who are just even calling our helpline or in our shelter program or receiving services another way.
Well, at the top of the show, I mentioned that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Mhm.
I don't have a lot of purple, so I would have worn purple today
I was
if I
thinking the
had
same
any.
thing.
But what do you think is something that is misunderstood or not widely known about domestic violence, not just in our community, but in any community?
I mean, I think the prevalence is widely unknown. And I think people have this idea of who's experienced it and what it means. I think some of the stereotypes that we have are of this, that physical violence, that those bruises, and we don't really see the other impacts of it. And I also think that we need to remind survivors that, and those that support them and love them, that telling them to leave, it may not be the best information, the best advice, that really listening, believing, and encouraging them to get support is probably one of the most important things we can do.
Yeah, let's just lift that up a little bit more because you may see something happening with somebody that you love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you may want to intervene. And while we want people to certainly provide social support, we also want people to do things that are safe, and
Right.
especially safe for somebody who might be in that situation.
Yeah. I think safety is one of the most important things that we need to talk about when we're looking at domestic violence.
And we also know that it cuts across everything. It cuts across race, socioeconomic class, sexual orientation, gender
Yep.
presentation.
Yep.
That you or I sitting here today could go home tonight um,
Mm-hmm.
and face it ourselves.
It's very
And
true.
so it's likely that many of us are coming in contact every day with somebody who
Mm-hmm.
has experienced some form of domestic violence.
Yeah, that is very
Um,
true.
so we're going to wrap this up. This has been a great conversation, and I'm going to give you a couple softball questions on the way
Okay.
out. The first one is, what motivates you to do this work?
I think the survivors that I've met, I got into this work years ago, focusing more on the crime of stalking. And through that, just really became passionate. But it really is the survivors that I have met doing this work. And the people that I work with, that's really what inspires me to keep going.
Yeah, I will say, having done this work now, the survivors are such they are balancing a lot,
Oh, yeah.
and I think you said they are resilient. They are also brave, and we want people to be safe and come forward, but we also recognize that they have a lot of strengths to build on when they do
Mm-hmm.
come forward, and we
Yeah.
want to encourage that from people as well.
Yeah.
So
And recognizing that there are many different ways to come forward, and it's up to that survivor how they want to do that, and we're here to support all of that.
yeah, and your advocacy is so important in our community. Um, and then finally, my last question for you is, if your life was a movie or a TV sitcom, what would be your theme song?
So I've been thinking about this one. I think it might be I left my heart in San Francisco. I'm a Bay Area girl. I'm a California person and moved out of California years ago, but still, I still have that inside of me and I'll carry it with me wherever I go.
Now, that's a great song, and the weather lately might remind you of the Bay, right? It could be
I'll tell you,
warm
North
and
Carolina does remind me a lot of where I grew up. I think that's why I like it here so much.
well, thank you, Michelle, for joining me on In Session. And thanks
Thank
to everybody
you.
who is tuned in. You can learn more about the Durham Crisis Response Center and the Family Justice Center at thedcrc.org. That's thedcrc.org. And we're going to upload those numbers again. And you can follow the Durham County District Attorney's Office on Facebook and Twitter and Medium. And we'll also have links to the Durham Crisis Response Center and the Family Justice Center. And again, Michelle, thank you so much for all your hard work. We could not do what we do without you.
And thank you so much for all that you and your office do.
Thank you.